My name is Simone Brandt. I am 31 years old. And last Christmas, I did something my family says they will never forgive me for. My father walked into the room, smirking like he was placing a lunch order. My brother stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding along the way he always did when someone else was about to do the work. My dad looked me dead in the eye and told me that my brother's 25 friends would be spending Christmas at their house. 25 people. He said it the way you say, pick up milk on your way home. And I was supposed to cook,
Clean.
set the table, serve every single plate, and wash every single dish, the same way I had for 12 straight years. I looked at my father, I looked at my brother, and I smiled. That night, I drove 90 minutes to Columbus, boarded a red-eye, and flew to Maui. What happened when those 25 people walked into an empty kitchen, what my Aunt Ruth said in front of every single one of them, and what was written in a notebook hidden in that attic for over 30 years, changed my family forever. Welcome back to Venge Legacy, the channel where one person's quiet, deliberate courage rewrites the rules of an entire family. If you have ever been the one everybody expected to say yes, the one they called when they needed something done, and forgot about the moment it was finished, drop a comment right now. Tell me your number. How many years? And if this is your first time here, subscribe now, because this story is going to hit differently. Let's go back to the beginning. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Maplewood, Ohio, 40 minutes from my parents' house in Hopewell. Close enough for guilt to reach me, far enough to breathe. My apartment was quiet in a way their house never was. No television blaring from the living room at full volume. No brother stomping up from the basement at 9 o'clock asking what's for dinner. No mother sighing under her breath about everything there was left to do, as if sighing were a form of help. I kept my counters clean. I ate when I wanted to. I cooked because I chose to. I worked as a bookkeeper at Garner and Associates, a small accounting firm that handled taxes for half the businesses in the county. The pay was steady. The work was invisible in the way all precision work is invisible. Nobody throws you a party when the books balance, but everybody notices when they don't. 3 years before the story begins, I started a catering side business with my friend Nora Castillo. We called it Brandt Kitchen. It began small, meal prep for a couple of neighbors, a birthday spread for a coworker. But by last fall, we had 4 recurring contracts, lunches for a dentist's office, weekly platters for a real estate agency, and 2 monthly events for local nonprofits. My apartment had more whisks than furniture. Cutting boards lined up next to the bathroom mirror. A commercial-grade stand mixer sat on my kitchen counter like a chrome sculpture. Nora handled operations and deliveries. I handled the books and the cooking. We split everything 50-50. And for the first time in my adult life, I had built something that was mine. Not inherited, not assigned, not demanded.
Mine.
But every November, like clockwork, my phone would ring. And those 40 minutes between Maplewood and Hopewell would shrink to nothing. I could balance 3 businesses' books before lunch. I could run a Christmas dinner for 30 people blindfolded. That was exactly the problem. Let me introduce you to the Brandt family. Because to understand what I did, you have to understand what I came from. My father, Ray Brandt, was 63 years old and had not boiled a pot of water since 1987. That is not an exaggeration. He retired early from the Hopewell manufacturing warehouse after 26 years as a floor supervisor. He'd spent more than 2 decades directing people, barking orders, running a crew of 40. He was good at it. He filled his retirement with a recliner, a remote control, and opinions, loud, unsolicited opinions about how other people should be spending their time. Ray had big hands and a bigger voice. He used both to run his household the same way he'd run that warehouse floor. Direct orders. No questions asked. My brother Troy was 34 years old. He sold Fords at the dealership on Route 9, lived in my parents' basement, and spent his commission checks on a lease truck he couldn't technically afford and weekend bar tabs that added up faster than he wanted to admit. He had not paid rent in 6 years. He had not cooked a meal in longer than that. But Troy was the son. And in the Brandt house, the son was the future. The daughter was the kitchen. My mother, Deborah, was 61. She had spent 30 years working the cafeteria line at Hopewell Elementary, scooping mashed potatoes, wiping down trays, smiling patiently at other people's children. She came home every afternoon and served more. She never questioned it. Not once. Not out loud, anyway. And then there was me, the daughter, the bookkeeper, the caterer, the one who, starting at 14 years old, cooked every single holiday meal this family sat down to eat. I need to take you back to when I was 14 because that's where this story really begins. My grandmother June, my father's mother, was teaching me how to make her pecan pie. We were standing at the kitchen counter together, flour on my nose, June's warm, steady hands guiding mine as I rolled out the dough. The kitchen smelled like brown sugar and cinnamon. The afternoon light was low and gold through the window. It was one of the most peaceful moments I can remember from childhood. Then my father walked through. He looked at us, at me with my small hands pressing into the dough, at June patient and calm beside me, and he said it so casually, so completely without thought. Good. Now she can handle Thanksgiving by herself. And he walked out. My grandmother's face went tight. I felt her hands pause over mine, just for a second. Her jaw set. But she said nothing. She said nothing. And I understand why now. She'd been saying nothing for 30-something years by then. Silence was her survival. That was the year I started cooking every holiday meal. I was 14. Troy was 17. He was upstairs playing video games. Nobody, not once, not ever, asked him to peel a single potato. 17 years later, I was still at that counter. Here's something my family managed to never discuss, even as it happened. 3 years before this Christmas, I found out my father had fallen behind on property taxes. The county had sent a lien notice. $14,000. I took out a personal loan and paid it. Between my bookkeeping salary and the catering income Nora and I had been building together for 3 years, I could cover the loan payments. It was tight, but I did it. Because that's what I did. I fixed things quietly and told no one. But every dollar I sent to that house was a dollar I wasn't saving for my own future. Then the furnace died in January. $6,800. I drove up at midnight with a space heater and a checkbook. Then the roof, leaking directly into Troy's beloved basement bedroom. $11,000. I wrote the check so the son of the house wouldn't have to sleep with a bucket next to his bed. I kept a running total in my head even when I tried not to. $31,800. Not counting groceries. Not counting gas money. Not counting 12 years of Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter and 4th of July and Troy's birthday and Ray's birthday and Deborah's birthday and every last minute can you bring a dish call from a cousin who couldn't be bothered to make one themselves. I kept that number like a stone in my chest. Solid. Heavy. Present every time I walked through their door. 5 weeks before Christmas, I cooked Thanksgiving dinner for 14 people. I started at 6 in the morning. Turkey. Cornbread stuffing. Green bean casserole. Mashed potatoes. Cranberry sauce from scratch. Real cranberries, not the stuff from the can. 2 pies. Pecan and pumpkin, both from Grandma June's recipes. By noon, the kitchen smelled like brown butter and sage, and my lower back felt like it had been kicked by someone who really meant it. Troy showed up at 1:15 in the afternoon. He walked straight to the kitchen, grabbed a plate, piled it high before half the family had even sat down. He ate standing in the hallway because he said the dining room was too crowded. He left his plate on the counter. And then, without asking a single person, he took the last slice of pecan pie down to the basement. Gone. That was my grandmother's pecan pie. The one I'd made from scratch. The one I'd spent the morning rolling dough for. Gone to the basement. My father stood up at the head of the table, raised his glass, and gave his toast. Thank you all for coming to our home. This is what family is about. Our home. Not Simone's food. Not Simone's 12 hours in the kitchen, our home. As though it belonged to the man who had nearly lost it to a county tax auction, a fact that never once came up in that toast. I washed dishes for 2 hours afterward. My mother dried, standing beside me in silence, her hands already red from the arthritis she refused to see a doctor about. At one point I said, quietly, Troy could help. My mother whispered back, you know how he is. I did know. That was exactly the problem. But the moment that cut deepest came at the very end of the night. My cousin Lisa looked over and said, "Simone, that pecan pie was incredible. Is that Grandma June's recipe?" Before I could open my mouth, Troy called out from the hallway, "Yeah, it's a family recipe." A family recipe. Like he had touched it. Like he had ever once held a rolling pin in his life. I told myself that was the last time. I did not know yet how right I was. 3 days before Christmas Eve, I was at my parents' house helping my mother wrap gifts at the dining table. Tissue paper, ribbons, stacked boxes. Troy had bought himself a new jacket, a nice one, and asked Deborah to wrap it so it would look like it came from someone. She didn't blink. She wrapped it. The front door opened. My father walked in from the living room. Troy right behind him, both of them grinning. That particular grin I had learned to distrust. My father leaned on the doorframe like a man announcing something perfectly reasonable. "Mona." He always called me Mona. I've hated it since I was 12. "Your brother's friends are all spending Christmas here." I set down the scissors. "How many?" Troy crossed his arms. "About 25. A couple might bring someone, so you know." My father clapped his hands once, sharp, decisive, like a foreman calling the shift to order. "It's only 25 people. Only." I looked at him. I looked at Troy. I looked at the jacket on the table that Troy had bought for himself and asked our 61-year-old arthritic mother to wrap. And I smiled. "Sure, Dad. I'll handle it." Troy gave me a thumbs up and disappeared downstairs. My father patted my shoulder as he passed. "That's my girl." I sat there with the wrapping paper for a long time after they left. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I already knew I would not be there on Christmas Day. I just hadn't told them yet. I went to the kitchen to assess what we had. The answer was not much. Condiments. Leftover meatloaf. Half a bag of frozen peas. Feeding 30 people, because you always cook for more than the head count, required a battle plan and somewhere around $600 in groceries. Troy appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with the particular ease of a man who has never once worried about how food arrives at a table. "So, Melanie is coming." I opened the fridge and counted eggs. "Girlfriend. 4 months. Her last name is Harding." He said it like he was announcing a corporate merger. The Hardings of Hopewell. Harding Insurance, one of the oldest agencies in town. Jean and Linda Harding sat in the front pew at First Methodist. Their daughter Melanie had a degree from Ohio State and a wardrobe that Troy could not remotely afford. "Her parents are coming too," Troy added. "Her sister. Maybe a cousin." I closed the refrigerator door. "So, this isn't just a party. This is an audition." He missed the point entirely. I needed to be impressive. Like, the full spread. Then he pulled out his phone and started reading. "Melanie's mom is gluten-free. Her dad can't do shellfish. Her sister is vegan. I'll text you the list." He thumbed the screen. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A dietary restriction list. From a man who had never once asked me what I wanted for dinner. I looked at him. "And what are you contributing, Troy?" He straightened up. Gestured grandly around the kitchen with both arms, the way a real estate agent might gesture out of view. "I'm providing the venue." The venue? The house my $14,000 had kept from county auction. The furnace I had replaced for $6,800. The roof I had fixed for $11,000. Troy was providing the venue the way a landlord provides a parking lot, by doing absolutely nothing and expecting credit for the concrete. That evening, the house settled into its usual rhythm. Ray in the recliner. Troy in the basement. Deborah beside me on the couch, flipping through a recipe binder she had kept since 1994. I was on my phone scrolling flights to Maui. My mother leaned over and said, gently, the way she always said everything gently, "I was thinking ham and turkey this year. Your grandmother always did both when the count was over 20. She meant it kindly. She was inviting me into a tradition. But what I heard was, the shift starts now. Mom, why can't Troy handle some of this?" Her hands paused on the binder. She glanced toward the basement door. "You know your brother. He means well, but he's not kitchen people." Kitchen people. Like it was a species. Like some of us were born with an apron gene, and the rest of us were simply excused. From the recliner, without turning his head, my father spoke. Family comes first, Mona. Always has. I looked at the back of his head. Family came first when I paid your tax bill, I thought. Family came first when your furnace died in January, and I drove up at midnight with a space heater. Family came first when the roof leaked into Troy's basement, and I wrote an $11,000 check so your golden boy wouldn't have to sleep with a bucket next to his bed. When did my family, meaning me, come first? Okay, Dad, I said. My mother patted my hand. It'll be a beautiful Christmas. Like always. Like always. That was exactly what I was afraid of. Late that night, I was lying in the upstairs guest bedroom. The plan had been to stay over and start grocery prep early. I was in the dark, listening to the house breathe, the television downstairs, Troy's voice from behind his closed door, water running in the kitchen sink. I was nearly asleep when I heard it. Troy, in the hallway, on the phone with one of his dealership buddies. Nah, man, you don't got to bring food. My sister handles all that. A pause. His buddy said something on the other end. Troy laughed. She likes cooking. She's good at it. She likes cooking. She is good at it. I sat up and pressed my palms flat against the quilt my mother had sewn for my old school shirts. My heartbeat was completely steady. No rage. Nothing hot. Something colder. Something finished. I picked up my phone and opened the calculator. 14,000 back taxes. 6,800 furnace. 11,000 roof. $31,800 in direct payments to keep this house standing. Not counting groceries. Not counting 12 years of holidays. Not counting anything that couldn't be measured in numbers. I set the phone down. Opened my laptop. One-way ticket. Columbus to Maui. December 24th. Red-eye departing at 1 in the morning. $462. I entered my card number. Confirmed the purchase. Closed the laptop. Lay back on the quilt. Stared at the ceiling. The ceiling I had paid to keep from caving in. Troy was still on the phone downstairs, laughing about something. He sounded happy. He had absolutely no idea what was coming. Morning. I drove to Hopewell General Market. Not for the party. I picked up a bag of dark roast coffee and a paperback thriller for the flight. At the checkout, I ran into Mrs. Kearney, 72, silver perm, lived 3 doors down from my parents since before I was born. She put her hand on my arm and beamed. Oh, honey, I heard about the big Christmas party. Your daddy must be so proud. I smiled exactly the way you smile at someone who means well and has no idea. He always is, Mrs. Kearney. She shuffled off with her cart. I watched her go and thought, she'd be at church Sunday morning telling everyone what a lovely family the Brandts were. I wondered if she'd still think so by then. Back in my car, my phone buzzed. Nora. Henderson Manufacturing confirmed the holiday gala for the 26th. 20 guests, full service. I need the chafing dishes and the carving station. Can I grab them from your folks' garage tonight? I paused. Then I said, come at 10. I'll leave the garage unlocked. Perfect. You're a lifesaver. I was not saving anyone. I was recovering my property. The chafing dishes. The industrial mixer. The baking trays. The carving station. The insulated serving containers. Every piece of it belonged to Brandt Kitchen, LLC. Every piece purchased with my money, stored in my parents' garage because I didn't have room in my apartment, and my family had used it at every holiday like it was simply part of the house. Nobody had ever asked where it came from. Nobody had ever asked what it cost. Nora didn't ask why I sounded so calm. She'd worked with me long enough to know that calm was my most dangerous setting. That afternoon, I drove back to the house. My father met me at the door with a new assignment. He needed me to pick up folding tables from the church. Pastor Greg said we could borrow 6. I set my keys on the counter. Dad, I'm not your event coordinator. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has just spoken in a foreign language. Then his face settled into the expression I had memorized over 31 years. Patient. Slightly disappointed. As though I were a child who needed a gentle reminder of how things worked. Family comes first, Mona. There it was again. The phrase that had followed me through every holiday, every birthday, every emergency check I had written. Family comes first. It only ever flowed in one direction, toward the people who weren't me. Troy walked through the kitchen in a new button-down shirt. Navy blue. Slim fit. Price tag still dangling from the cuff. Looking sharp for tomorrow, he said to his own reflection in the microwave door. $80. For a shirt to impress Melanie Harding. He hadn't spent one single dollar on the party that was supposedly his idea. Meanwhile, my mother was in the kitchen peeling potatoes. Her knuckles were swollen. The skin around her nail beds was cracked from decades of hot water and industrial soap. She winced when the peeler slipped, but caught herself and kept going. I walked over and took the peeler out of her hand.
Mom.
Sit down. She started to protest. I said it again, firmer. Sit down? She sat. We didn't talk. The only sounds were the faucet dripping and the scrape of the peeler against potato skin. I looked at her hands resting on the table.
Red.
Tired.
Bent at the joints.
She had been peeling potatoes for other people her entire life. That was the last time I stood in that kitchen with a peeler in my hand. That evening, I was in the kitchen making a grocery list. Keeping up appearances. Writing items I would never buy. 20 pounds of turkey breast. 5 pounds of ham. Russet potatoes. Heavy cream. 3 bags of cranberries. Troy was in the living room on a video call with Melanie. I could hear them clearly through the open doorway. Melanie asked, "So, what does your sister do exactly for Christmas?" Troy leaned back on the couch. Everything. Cooking, cleaning, setting up, serving, cleanup. He paused. Then he laughed. She's basically our maid, but she doesn't charge. Melanie giggled. My pen stopped on the notepad. I did not flinch. I did not drop the pen. I did not gasp or tear up or clench my fist. I calmly tore the grocery list in half, folded the pieces, put them in the trash. A maid. That was the word. And the worst part, the part that sat in my chest like a stone, was that he wasn't wrong. The only difference between me and a hired maid was that a hired maid got a paycheck, a day off, and the legal right to quit. So I quit. I walked upstairs, closed the guest bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed, and called Aunt Ruth. She answered on the second ring, like she had been expecting it. Ruth was 67, my father's older sister. She ran a bed and breakfast called Gannon House in Fairfield, 35 minutes east of Hopewell. She had built it herself after walking out of this family's house at 19 years old. Same family, same kitchen, same expectations. But she had walked away before the pattern could harden around her like concrete. She was the only person in my entire family who understood exactly what I was carrying. When I told her what Troy had said, Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said simply, "Tell me everything."
So I did.
The $31,800. 12 years of free holiday labor. The announcement about the 25 guests and the smirk on my father's face. The dietary restriction list Troy had texted me from his phone while I counted eggs in the refrigerator. The grocery list I had just torn in half. Ruth listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "Your grandmother would have walked out 30 years ago if she'd had somewhere to go." "I have somewhere to go," I said. "Maui." "Good. Then, and I'm coming to Christmas." "You always come to Christmas." "This year I'm coming with my eyes open." "You just go, sweetheart. I'll be there at noon." She didn't promise to do anything dramatic. She didn't say she would confront Ray or stage an intervention. She promised to see. And in a town like Hopewell, where reputations lasted longer than rooflines, being seen was its own kind of power. But before I tell you what happened at Christmas, I need to tell you what I found in the attic. Because without it, you only have half the story. Earlier that same day, my father had asked me to bring down his mother's roasting pans from the attic. Behind the Christmas boxes, he'd said, already walking away. The attic was cold and dim, lit by a single bare bulb on a pull chain. Dust on everything. Boxes labeled in my mother's careful handwriting. Christmas ornaments. Troy's trophies. Tablecloths. I found the roasting pans behind a stack of old encyclopedias. And behind the pans, wedged up against the eave where the roof sloped down. A tin box.
Green.
Rusted at the corners. The kind that used to hold butter cookies at Christmas. The lid was stamped with 2 words. June Kitchen. I pried it open. Inside was a notebook. Small, maybe 5 by 7 inches. Dark green cover. A rubber band around it that snapped the moment I touched it. I opened the first page. My grandmother's handwriting. Small, even, slanting just slightly to the right. Columns. A column of dates. A column of events. A column of guest counts. A column of dishes. And, at the end of each row, a dollar amount. Thanksgiving 1972. 18 guests. Turkey, for sides, 2 pies. $45. Easter 1978. 12 guests. Ham, scalloped potatoes rolls. $32. Christmas 1985. 22 guests. Ham, prime rib, 6 sides, 3 desserts. $112. Page after page. Year after year. 3 decades of holiday meals. Logged in pencil like an accountant keeping a private second set of books that nobody else was supposed to see. The last entry was at the bottom of the final page. Christmas 2003. 16 guests. Everything. $340. She died in March of 2004. Below that last entry, underlined once, just once, in a slightly different pencil, as though she had gone back later to write it. 187 meals. No one ever asked how much. I held the notebook against my chest and sat on the attic floor in the cold. One entry from 1991 had a note in the margin. R didn't come to the kitchen once. R, my father. He had not come into the kitchen a single time during a holiday meal that year. And his own mother had noticed it, had written it down, because noticing was the only form of rebellion she allowed herself. Another margin note, 1998. Deborah helped. First time in years. My grandmother had documented what nobody else would say out loud. That the women in this family fed everyone, and the men in this family ate. That was the contract. Unspoken. Inherited. Passed down like the house and the roasting pans and the recipe for pecan pie. 3 generations. Same kitchen. Same silence. June counted. Deborah endured. And I had been standing at that counter since I was 14 years old, repeating the patterns so faithfully that my brother had confused my labor with my identity. I tucked the notebook into my bag. Not as evidence. I wasn't building a case. I took it because my grandmother deserved to have someone hold what she had carried alone. December 23rd, 9:50 at night. The house was quiet. Ray asleep in the recliner. Deborah in bed. Troy in the basement with his headphones on. I moved quickly. First, I texted Nora. Garage unlocked. Take everything. Chafing dishes, mixer, trays, carving station, serving containers. All of it. Load it tonight. Nora. On my way. Second, I opened my laptop and logged into the Brandt Kitchen wholesale account at Hopewell General Market. 3 days earlier, back when I still believed this Christmas would be like every other one, I had placed a standing order under the business name. 60 pounds of turkey. A whole ham. 10 pounds of potatoes. Butter. Cream. Cranberries. Enough produce to feed 30 people. I canceled it. The store would refund the deposit to my business account within 48 hours. Without that order, there was nothing in my parents' kitchen that could feed more than 4 people. Third, I wrote a letter by hand. Short. Factual. I left it on the kitchen counter, face down under the salt shaker. Addressed to Dad. Then I packed. 1 carry-on bag. 5 days of warm weather clothes. The green notebook. A phone charger. Sunscreen. I carried my bag downstairs and stopped in the kitchen doorway. The light above the stove was on. The same amber glow that had lit this room for as long as I could remember. I stood there a moment, looking at the counter where June had rolled out pie crust, where Deborah had peeled 1,000 potatoes, where I had served hundreds of meals to people who never once said thank you. 3 generations of Brandt women had stood at that counter. I was the first one to walk away from it. I closed the front door behind me without a sound. The drive to Columbus took 90 minutes. December dark. The highway nearly empty. I passed the Hopewell town sign at the edge of the road, white letters on green, population 100, and watched it shrink in my rearview mirror until it disappeared. The radio played something soft that I forgot immediately. I pulled into the airport parking garage at 11:40. The red-eye to Maui left at 1 in the morning, connecting through Denver. Checked in. Security.
Gate.
Molded plastic chair. A man sleeping under a Bengals jacket beside me. My phone buzzed. A text from Deborah, sent at 10:15. Don't forget the cranberry sauce tomorrow. Love, Mom. She had sent it while I was packing, while Nora was loading my equipment into her van, while the letter sat under the salt shaker, waiting to be found. She was still thinking about cranberry sauce, because that was all she knew how to think about. The next task, the next meal, the next thing to be done for someone who would never thank her. I had spent my whole life being the cranberry sauce, the thing no one remembered to ask about, but everyone noticed the instant it was gone. I turned off my phone, boarded the plane, middle seat, stale air. The engine hummed. The runway lights blurred outside the window. And then we were climbing. Somewhere below, Hopewell was asleep. Ray in his recliner. Troy in the basement. Deborah in bed, her cracked hands folded on the quilt. And I was above all of it, for the first time in 31 years. I landed in Maui the next morning. Warm air hit my face the second I stepped outside the terminal. Salt and plumeria and heat. Actual heat. In December, I took off my jacket, stood in the sun, and breathed. Just breathed. 7 in the morning, Eastern Time. Deborah went to the kitchen to start prep. She opened the pantry. Flour, sugar, a half-empty bag of rice. No turkey. No ham. No cranberries. No heavy cream. No butter. No potatoes in the quantities you need to feed 30 people. She walked to the garage and unlocked the side door. The shelves that had held the chafing dishes were bare. The hooks where the carving station tools had hung were empty. The industrial mixer, gone. The baking trays, gone. The insulated serving containers, gone. Deborah stood in the garage for a full minute. Then she went inside and called me. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. Texted. Simone, where are you? The food isn't here. No response. Then she saw the letter. Face down under the salt shaker, my handwriting on the front. Just Dad. She picked it up. Read it standing at the counter in her bathrobe, the overhead light buzzing above her. The letter said, Dad, I have cooked 144 holiday meals for this family in the last 12 years. I will not cook meal 145. The equipment in the garage belongs to Brandt Kitchen LLC, my business. It has been retrieved. I have also canceled the wholesale grocery order, which was placed under my business account. Merry Christmas. Simone. Deborah read it twice. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. Then she stood there for a long time, her hand pressed flat against the counter where her mother had rolled dough, where her daughter had served hundreds of meals, and the air still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the spice box June had left behind. She opened the spice drawer. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved with June's initials burned into the lid.
Cinnamon sticks.
Whole cloves. Star anise. Allspice berries. June had packed that box fresh every October for 40 years. After she died, Deborah had kept refilling it. Same spices, same aisle at Hopewell General, same compartments. She told me later she didn't know exactly why. She just did. She held a cinnamon stick to her nose. And it smelled, she told me, like Christmas morning in 1990 when she was 26 and pregnant with Troy, sitting at that same table, watching June roll out dough with steady, unhurried hands. June had looked up and said, You're a good girl, Deb. But don't let them make you too good. Deborah hadn't understood it then. She told me over coffee in a Maplewood diner 2 months later. She understood it now. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, closed the spice box, and went to wake my father.
Ray.
Simone is gone. He blinked. What do you mean, gone?
Gone.
The food is gone. The equipment is gone. She is gone. My father sat up in bed and looked at her like she'd told him the house was on fire. In a way, she had. The fire just wasn't the kind he could see. He couldn't smell the smoke yet, but every guest who walked through that door in 24 hours would feel the heat. Ray stormed into the kitchen in his bathrobe and slippers. Yanked the refrigerator open.
Eggs.
Ketchup. Leftover meatloaf. A jar of pickles. Opened the pantry. Flour, sugar, rice, a box of stale crackers. Went to the garage. Bare shelves. Empty hooks. He came back and stood in the middle of the kitchen, turning in a slow circle, like a man who has lost something he cannot name. Where's the food? Where's everything? Deborah's voice was flat. She canceled the order. It was under her business account. Her account? What the hell does that mean? Troy appeared on the basement stairs, hair pressed flat on one side, gym shorts, a coat thrown over his sleep shirt. What's going on? Ray's jaw was tight. Your sister left. Food's gone. Equipment's gone. Troy stared. The gears turned slowly. Then the color drained from his face. Melanie's coming tomorrow. Her parents are coming. I know who's coming, Ray snapped. Call her. Call Simone right now. Troy dialed. Voicemail. Dialed again. Voicemail. Texted. Where are you? Message delivered. Unread. Ray grabbed the kitchen landline, the one he'd insisted on keeping, and dialed my number himself. For the first time in months, my father called his daughter. I did not answer. He stood holding the receiver, listening to my voicemail greeting. This is Simone. Leave a message. And I like to imagine that those ordinary words hit him differently than they ever had before. Because for the first time, the person on the other end of the line was not late. Not on her way with groceries. Not almost there.
Just gone.
Troy grabbed his truck keys and drove to Hopewell General Market in gym shorts and a coat. The store manager, Bill Paxton, was restocking the dairy case on Christmas Eve morning. Troy asked for a rush order. Turkey, ham, sides, dessert supplies, enough for 30 people. Bill checked his system and shook his head. We had a bulk order canceled last night under Brandt Kitchen. I can't get that quantity back by tomorrow. It's Christmas Eve, son. The trucks already ran. Troy tried the 2 catering companies in the county. Both booked through New Year's. One receptionist actually laughed when he asked about same-day Christmas service. He tried an online grocery delivery service. Earliest available window, December 27th. Rural Ohio does not bend for panic. By noon, Troy was back at the house with 8 rotisserie chickens from the store deli, 4 bags of frozen mashed potatoes, 2 cans of cranberry sauce, the kind in the can with the ridges still on it, a pre-made fruit salad in a plastic clamshell, and 2 pumpkin pies from the bakery case. $382. On his credit card. The first money Troy had spent on this household in 3 years. He spread it all out on the kitchen counter. Ray looked at it the way a man looks at a flat tire on a highway. That's not Christmas dinner. That's a gas station buffet. Troy stiffened. It's the best I could do in 6 hours. 6 hours? Ray's voice went hard. Asterisk, your sister could have done it in 3. The room went quiet. Troy looked at his father. Ray didn't even realize what he had just said. That even while losing everything, even while cursing me for leaving, his first instinct was to measure his son against his daughter. And Troy heard it. Christmas morning. 11 o'clock. Troy had done his best. Truly. The rotisserie chickens were reheated in the oven, sitting in aluminum foil pans because the good roasting pans were in the attic and nobody could locate the serving platters. The frozen mashed potatoes were microwaved in the bag. The cranberry sauce still wore the shape of the tin it came from. Troy had set up a folding table in the living room and covered it with a bedsheet because the tablecloths were somewhere in the garage and he didn't know where. He used paper plates because the china required serving pieces he didn't have. The house smelled like warmed-over poultry and something that had no good name. First guests arrived at 11:30. Troy's dealership buddies, their girlfriends. They walked in, looked at the folding table, looked at the paper plates, and one of them said, "Where's the spread, bro? You said full Christmas dinner." Troy smiled, forced and tight. "Yeah, we had some last-minute changes." More people trickled in. College friends. A couple from his softball league. They were polite, but confused. Troy had talked up this party for weeks. At 12:10, Melanie arrived. With her parents, Jean Harding in a pressed blazer, Linda Harding in a cashmere scarf, Melanie in a deep green dress she had clearly chosen with care for the occasion. They walked into the living room. Bedsheet tablecloth, paper plates, rotisserie chicken carved unevenly on a cutting board, canned cranberry sauce still wearing the shape of the tin. Linda Harding's eyebrow rose exactly 1/4 of an inch. Melanie leaned close to Troy and whispered, "I thought your sister was cooking." Troy's jaw tightened. She had an emergency. 12:15. The doorbell rang. Ray opened it. Aunt Ruth stood on the porch in a wool coat, gray hair pulled back in a low, neat bun, holding her tin of homemade butter cookies the way she did every single Christmas. "Merry Christmas, Ray." She stepped inside, hugged Deborah a moment longer than usual, and whispered something that I will never know. Then she got herself a cup of coffee, sat in the armchair by the window, and watched. She watched Troy fumble with a carving knife he had clearly never held before, sawing at a rotisserie chicken like he was cutting rope. She watched Ray circle the room, telling the same story to different clusters of guests. "Simone couldn't make it this year. Work emergency. You know how it is." She watched Jean Harding nod politely while his eyes moved around the room with the careful, quiet assessment of a man who runs a business and knows the difference between a setback and a collapse. Ruth sat there for 45 minutes. She drank her coffee. She ate one of her own cookies. She smiled when people spoke to her and answered questions about the bed and breakfast. She did not mention me once. And in the way that only someone who has waited decades to be proven right can wait, she let the room fill up with its own evidence. Every guest who glanced at the paper plates. Every awkward silence when Troy's work emergency story didn't quite land. Ruth watched it all the way a judge watches opening arguments she already knows the verdict for. Then, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody's phone changed everything. I had posted a single photo from Maui, my hand holding a coffee cup, the Pacific stretching out behind it, blue and endless. I hadn't written much. Just, "Merry Christmas from Maui. First holiday in 12 years I didn't spend in someone else's kitchen." I had posted it for myself. Not for them. But the internet doesn't care about intent. Melanie's friend saw it first. Screenshotted it. Texted Melanie. "Isn't that Troy's sister? She's in Hawaii? I thought she was sick or something." Melanie pulled out her phone. Read the post. Read the caption again. Then she turned the screen toward Troy, who was standing by the food table holding a paper plate. "I thought you said she had a work emergency." Troy's face went white. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Jean Harding leaned over from behind Melanie and read the caption out loud, the way a man reads a contract clause he wants everyone in the room to hear clearly. "First holiday in 12 years I didn't spend in someone else's kitchen." The room went quiet. Not movie quiet. Real quiet. The kind where you hear the furnace kick on. The kind where you can hear someone across the room swallow. Guests looked at each other. At the paper plates. At the store-bought food. At Troy, who was still holding his plate like a small shield. Ray stepped forward. "She's being dramatic. She always." And then Ruth set her coffee cup down. The ceramic base hit the side table with a single small, clear sound. Not loud. Just precise. Every head in the room turned toward her. Ruth stood. She looked at my father. Ruth did not shout. She spoke the way someone speaks at a graveside, measured, deliberate, as though every word had been weighed before it left her mouth. "Simone has cooked Christmas dinner for this family every year since she was 19 years old. Before that, our mother, June, did it for 36 years. Before that, our grandmother." She looked around the room. 25 guests. Paper plates. Aluminum foil pans. "Do you know what 3 generations of women cooking for free looks like?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A photograph I had texted her the night before. A photo of the ledger's final page. She unfolded it and laid it flat on the coffee table where everyone in the room could see the penciled rows of dates and dollar amounts stretching back to 1967. Our mother kept a record. Every holiday meal she cooked from 1967 to 2003. Every guest count. Every dollar it would have cost to hire someone to do what she did for nothing. She tapped the paper once with her finger. 187 meals. Simone found this notebook 2 days ago in the attic.
She paused.
The room was absolutely still. Do you know what was written at the bottom of the last page? Silence. 187 meals. No one ever asked how much. Linda Harding set her fork down. Gene Harding uncrossed his arms. One of Troy's buddies looked at the floor. Simone would have been meal 188. She decided she would be the last. Ray stepped forward, neck flushed red. Ruth, this is a family matter. It stopped being a family matter when you invited 25 strangers to eat food your daughter was going to cook for free. Ruth looked at him the way she'd probably looked at him when they were children. Older sister. Completely unimpressed. It's only 25 people, right, Ray? That's what you told her. Her voice did not rise. 25 people. And here they are, standing around paper plates and grocery store chicken. Because the one person who made this family look good finally decided to stop. She turned to Troy. He was still standing by the food table. His paper plate now resting on the edge of it like he had forgotten he was holding it.
Troy.
3 years ago, this house was 60 days from a county tax auction. Do you know who paid the $14,000 to stop it?
Troy blinked.
Dad handled that. Simone handled it. She took a personal loan and paid the county in full. Your father has not repaid a dollar. The room was so still you could have heard a pin drop in Hawaii. 2 years ago, the furnace. $6,800. Simone wrote a check. Last year, the roof leaked into your basement. $11,000. Simone. Ruth did not look at notes. She had those numbers the way I had those numbers, branded into memory by the weight of carrying them alone. Ray's voice came out ragged. That was a family arrangement. A family arrangement where one person pays and everyone else pretends it never happened? Ruth looked at the guests now. Not performing. Not dramatic. Just a woman stating facts in a room full of witnesses. My niece has spent $31,800 keeping this roof over their heads. Troy, who lives in the basement rent-free, who has not paid a utility bill or bought a bag of groceries in 3 years, has contributed $0. And 2 days ago, Ray looked his daughter in the eye and told her to cook for 25 people like she was the help. Gene Harding cleared his throat and set his napkin on the table. The gesture was small and absolute. Melanie was looking at Troy. Troy's mouth was open. Nothing was coming out. Finally, I didn't know about the money. Ruth's reply was immediate. That's the point. You never asked. You never had to. She looked at him steadily. You told your friend she likes cooking. That she's good at it. She is good at it, Troy. That's why she started a business. That's why she charges her clients. That's why she does not owe you a free meal. Ray exploded. He slammed both hands flat on the dining table, and the paper plates jumped. You come into my house on Christmas Day and humiliate me in front of everyone? The warehouse supervisor. The man who had managed crews twice his size. Losing control in his own living room, in front of his son's friends and his son's girlfriend and her family. Ruth did not flinch. She stood 5 feet from him with her hands clasped in front of her. This house was 60 days from not being your house, Ray. Simone made sure you still have a door to slam. She turned my own sister against me. No one turned me. I've watched you do this for 20 years. I just never had 25 witnesses before. The room was coming apart at the seams. Guests edged toward the door. Troy's buddy Jake grabbed his coat. Melanie's mother stood and put her scarf on. Ray pointed at Ruth, finger trembling. Get out. I'll leave when I'm finished. The finger stayed in the air, but the voice behind it had cracked. Ruth was calm the way deep water is calm, still on the surface, immovable underneath. Ray could shout all he wanted. He was shouting at a woman who had walked away from this family's kitchen at 19 years old and never looked back. She had nothing to lose. He had everything to lose.
And he was losing it in real time.
Gene Harding put his hand on Melanie's shoulder. We're leaving. Melanie looked at Troy one final time. Troy could not meet her eyes. The Hardings left without saying goodbye. Deborah sat at the kitchen table through all of it. She hadn't spoken once. When the last guests were filing out, she reached into her apron pocket, pulled out my letter, unfolded it, and slid it across the table to Ray. He read it. The last line, the one I had written by hand in the guest bedroom the night before. I love this family, but love is not a reason to disappear. The guests left in small groups, the way people leave a room where something irreplaceable has broken. Some nodded at Ruth as they went. Some just slipped out quietly. Mrs. Kearney, who had told me at the grocery store that my daddy must be so proud, stopped in the doorway and looked at Deborah. You raised a good daughter, Deb. I hope you know that. Deborah nodded once. Mrs. Kearney left. By 2 in the afternoon, the house was empty except for Ray, Deborah, Troy, and Ruth. Troy sat on the basement stairs, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He hadn't spoken since Ruth had said, "You never asked." Ray sat at the dining table, the letter in front of him. He had read it 3 times. His hands were flat on the table and his jaw was set, but the anger had burned through its fuel, and what was left was something smaller. Not shame, exactly, but the beginning of understanding that shame might be the correct response. Deborah's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. A text from me, sent from a beach in Maui. Merry Christmas, Mom. I'll call you next week. I'm okay.
Not, I'm sorry.
Not. Tell Dad I love him. Not. Is everyone all right? Just. I'm okay. Deborah showed it to Ruth. Ruth nodded. She stood, brushed the cookie crumbs from her coat, picked up her tin. I'm going home. When she calls next week, you should answer. Both of you. She looked at Ray. And Ray, the next time your daughter pays $11,000 to keep your roof from caving in, say thank you. Ruth walked out. The front door closed behind her. The house was quiet in a way it had not been quiet in years. Not the absence of sound, the absence of someone willing to fill the silence. I spent Christmas afternoon on a beach in Maui. The sand was warm. The paperback thriller sat open on my lap, but I hadn't turned a page in an hour. My phone was off. I didn't need to hear from anyone in Ohio. The sun was going down, painting the water copper and pink and deep orange, and I watched it the way you watch something you have earned. I thought about the ledger. 187 meals. My grandmother had stood at that counter from 1967 to 2003 and counted every single one, because counting was the only way she could prove to herself that it mattered. That someone should notice. That the hours and the dollars and the aching hands were real, even if no one acknowledged them. I was meal 188, and I had written myself out of the book. I reached into my bag and pulled out the green notebook, held it in the fading light, turned to the page after June's last entry, the blank one, uncapped a pen, and wrote, Christmas 2025. 0 guests. 0 meals.
First time. SB.
I closed the notebook and slipped it back into my bag. The rubber band was long gone, so I wrapped a hair tie around it instead. The sun dropped below the water. The sky turned purple. The beach emptied out. And I sat there a little longer. Because I could. Because nobody was waiting for me to clear the table or wrap the leftovers or wash the dishes or drive home in the dark, so I could wake up the next morning and do it again. 1 week later, I was back in my apartment in Maplewood. The tan from Maui was already fading. Ohio doesn't let you keep anything warm for long. The fallout came in pieces, like shrapnel on a delay. Melanie Harding texted Troy the day after Christmas. I can't be with someone who treats their own sister like the help. Good luck, Troy. He didn't respond. He moved his belongings from one corner of the basement to another, the closest thing to relocation he had ever managed. Jean Harding mentioned the Christmas incident at the Rotary Club. In a town like Hopewell, that is not gossip. That is a news broadcast. Within a week, Ray Brandt, the man who had spent 30 years priding himself on running a respectable household, was the man who had made his daughter cook 12 years of free meals and then demanded she serve 25 strangers while his adult son contributed nothing. Ray did not call me. I did not expect him to. The man who couldn't say thank you was certainly not going to say sorry. But Deborah called.
Once. Brief.
Her voice careful. The way you speak when you've rehearsed something but aren't sure you'll get through it. I read the letter, Simone. I should have said something a long time ago.
I didn't argue.
I didn't comfort her. I said, "I know, Mom." And I meant both things. I knew she should have spoken up. And I knew exactly why she hadn't. Aunt Ruth did something I didn't expect. At the women's group at First Methodist, she brought up a question: how many of them had spent decades cooking holiday meals without being thanked? The room went quiet, and then it didn't. Every woman over 55 had a story. The pastor's wife organized what she called a Give the Cooks a Break potluck for New Year's Eve. Every dish brought by someone who usually sat at the table instead of standing at the stove. I wasn't there, but they told me about it later. Nora called the second week of January. Henderson wants to book us quarterly. Also, 3 of the Rotary wives want catering quotes for spring events. I laughed. It was the first real laugh in weeks. I had spent 12 years cooking for free. The moment I stopped, people started asking what I was worth.
February.
I drove to Hopewell. Not for a holiday. Not to cook. I met Deborah at the Maple Leaf Diner on Route 9, the one with the cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1997. She was already there when I walked in. She looked smaller than I remembered. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $2,000. I looked at it, then at her.
Who wrote this? Troy.
Ruth talked to him. He's been picking up extra shifts at the dealership. It's not all of it, but it's a start. I held the envelope and let that settle.
Troy picking up extra shifts.
Troy writing a check. Troy doing something that cost him effort and discomfort, maybe for the first time in his adult life. It wasn't enough. Not close to enough. But it was a direction. And Dad. Deborah looked at her coffee. He's not there yet. I nodded. When he is, he knows where to find me. We sat for a while. She told me about the potluck, about the women at church who had started talking about the meals they had cooked without thanks, about how Ruth had stood up at the meeting and said, "If you have in the kitchen in your family, it is okay to close the door." I picked up the check, put it in my bag, next to the green notebook. Here is what I know now that I did not fully understand before. The kitchen is not a prison. It never was. It is a choice. And the moment I chose to leave it, I discovered something that had been true all along. The people who loved me, not my cooking, not my usefulness, not my ability to turn an empty pantry into a holiday spread, those people found me wherever I went. Nora, Ruth, eventually, Deborah. And the people who only loved what I could do for them stayed exactly where I left them. I did not destroy my family. I gave them the one thing no one had ever given them before, the chance to see clearly what it looked like without me. No more invisible labor to take for granted. No more Simone-shaped hole where the work happened. Just the truth, finally visible, in a room full of paper plates and 25 witnesses. My grandmother June kept a notebook for 36 years because counting was the only form of recognition available to her. I found it. I held it. I added the final entry. And then I closed the book. Christmas 2025. 0 guests. 0 meals.
First time.
If this story reached something in you, if you recognized yourself in that kitchen, in that silence, in that moment of smiling and saying, "Sure, I'll handle it," when every part of you wanted to scream, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me how many years. Tell me what your Maui moment was, or what you wish it had been. If this is the kind of story that reminded you your time and your labor have real value, even when nobody says thank you, share it with someone who needs to hear that today.
Hit like, subscribe,
and click the next video, because I have more stories like this one, and every single one of them starts the same way, with one person who finally decided enough was enough. I'll see you in the next one.